TSN's Motoring 94 is brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas. For brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service, trust your car to Midas.
The Arizona desert, just outside of Phoenix, is the site for this week's edition of Motoring 94. Now, the locals tell us these boulders have been around for over 12 million years. And unlike their neighbors to the west in California, these rocks stay in one place. Hello, everybody. Well, you know, when it comes to car companies, they cannot afford to stand still. So with that in mind, Nissan has selected this site for the world premiere of one of their most successful and certainly most important cars, the Maxima. When the Maxima made its debut in 1981, it was an instant success. In fact, by 1989, sales had reached a high of over 6,000 vehicles in Canada. But last year, sales dropped to 4,200. Maxima customers were still reporting satisfaction, but Maxima now had competition, with the Toyota Camry doing most of the damage. In fact, over 16,000 Camrys were sold in Canada in 1993. Nissan, not prepared to lose more ground, has responded by introducing the 1995 edition of what has become their flagship vehicle.
Our current Maxima is a very good car, but 5.5 years, things change. And for example, our whole new engine, it's more powerful, more fuel efficient, lighter. Those are new generation engines, and also our rear suspensions. Those are the ones for 90s. And it's not just a skin change; it's a whole change ground up.
I think there is to some extent, and I think at times, when you're very successful with a product, I think the tendency, generally speaking, is to get a little bit conservative with it. But I think, as you were able to see today, we've not been conservative with the car at all. It's a really nice evolution from what Maxima was to where we're going with it. The car is a lot bigger. It's got more power. It's the passenger compartment is much larger than the old one, and in fact, the parts interchangeability from the old one to the new one is almost non-existent. So the car is completely redesigned, but it retained the heritage, and I think our designers have done a great job with it.
So Nissan is naturally confident the new Maxima is a winner. So confident that Canadian auto journalists were invited to a test track in Arizona to drive not only the Maxima, but also the competition.
On this particular event, we brought out the Camry with a new V6 in it. We brought out a Mercedes-Benz 280. We have, a whole array of cars, including the Ford Taurus SHO, which for many people has been a benchmark car in this area. We use the Arizona Test Center, which is a very large hot weather test center in the desert, and we use the skid pad, and we laid it out with a slalom course that gives a very good opportunity to evaluate the handling of these cars comparatively. And then we used what we call a marketability course, which is it's almost like a country lane winding its way up and down hill right through around the inside of the track in the desert.
I think it's a great idea that they bring out a competitor's car here. This type of maneuver gives you a chance to check out there's a dead cone, the transitional behavior of the car. There's another dead cone. And I think it's a fairly ballsy move fairly brave move to bring out competitors' cars, because they, hey, face it, they stand the chance of you making a comparison that may, not be flattering to them. So, you okay back there?
Well, this one was surprisingly fair. They gave you the opportunity to drive each of the vehicles around the track. Tyre pressures were all about the same, and the vehicles were equipped pretty much as you're going to find them in the marketplace. Other comparisons I've seen, they've skewed the results by undersizing the tyres, inflating the tyres on their vehicle so you get better handling characteristics and stuff like that. If it's done fairly, it's a wonderful thing, because trying to remember what you thought of X competition that you drove 2 months ago when you're trying to compare it against the car you're driving today, sometimes you lose a little bit of that perspective, and so having the vehicle, you know, back to back really puts the whole thing into perspective.
Maxima is not only one of our bread and butter car, but it is Nissan's statement. You know, we created this segment of the market by our current Maxima, 5.5 years ago. We've been very successful. It's a very important car for us.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive, we look at Ford's latest subcompact. This is the 1994 Ford Aspire, a car that they've spent an awful lot of time and effort and money to get right. Have they succeeded? We'll have the answer for you at the end of this week's Test Drive. The suspension on the Aspire is comprised of McPherson struts up front, complete with a roll bar, and a torsion beam axle in back. The degree of on-road comfort is really quite surprising. Large bumps are swallowed in stride, and the level of harshness over the small stuff has been well controlled. On the skid pad, the Aspire fared reasonably well. When pushed, there is a degree of understeer. Push it a little harder and the tail begins to hang out. At first, this sensation is more than a little off-putting. Once you get used to it, though, you can actually put this characteristic to use. If I were to purchase one of these little buggies, the first move would to be upgrade the rubber. While the Yokohama steel-belted radials provide reasonable grip, I think the tail-happy aspect of the handling characteristics could be brought under control with slightly larger tyres. Now, the bodywork will allow a bigger tyre. Under the hood is a 1.3-litre single overhead cam engine that benefits from the use of sequential fuel injection. Power is rated at a rather meagre 64 horsepower and 74 pounds-feet of torque. Both the idle quality and engine noise are reasonable. Only when you get further up the rev range does the engine begin to protest. During the test, the automatic version returned an average fuel economy of 31 miles per gallon or 9.1 litres per 100 kilometres. If you stick with the manual tranny, the fuel economy shoots up to a much better average of almost 40 miles per gallon. While you wouldn't want to drive the Aspire on the highway because of its diminutive dimensions, for round town use it's near perfect. It's nimble, agile and very easy to park. The only other thing of concern is the choice of transmission. It's a must to go with the manual gearbox because the automatic, well, it's plain and simply as slow as molasses on a March morning. In the race to the 100k mark, the automatic Aspire requires 17 seconds. Now, slow is not the word. As I suggested, stick with the stick shift and you'll get much better fuel economy and a 0 to 100k time of just under 13 seconds. While not exactly quick, it is more than adequate in the city. Stopping power is provided by a power-assisted disc drum setup. During the brake test, we required just 111 feet to stop from 80k. The short stopping distances and excellent pedal feel get top marks. The optional anti-lock brake system is worth every penny of its $784 price tag. A point worthy of mention is the fact that the Aspire is the lowest priced vehicle on the market with both dual airbags and anti-lock brakes. One of the surprising things about the Aspire is the amount of room in the rear. There's ample leg room and reasonable headroom. Now, while you wouldn't want to sit back here if you had to drive across Canada, for running around town it's ideal. Up front, the seats offer a high degree of comfort. The dash is analog, easy to read and comprehensive. That said, the lack of a tachometer disappointed me. The heater controls and radio are placed in such a manner that you can reach both with ease. The trouble is, the buttons on the radio are tiny and very fiddly. To operate it, you must take your eyes off the road, which is not a good idea at the best of times. Below these is a dual coffee cup holder. Cigarette smoking caffeine addicts will be out of luck because you cannot use the ashtray if you use the cup holder. Ford get a couple of bonus marks for putting a rear wash wiper on this Aspire because this window collects more than its fair share of dirt. However, they lose those bonus points for a couple of real bonehead moves. First of all, this catch sits right at eye level, and believe me, when you bump into it, which I've done a couple of times, it truly hurts. The other thing, the location of the washer bottle. It'll be a miracle if you get any washer fluid into there. I'm prepared to bet more than 50% of it ends up in the wheel well. My quibbles aside, the Aspire is versatile. Even in the base 3-door model, you get a privacy cover and 60/40 split folding rear seats that tumble forward for maximum cargo capacity. The silly thing is that in the more expensive 4-door version, you don't get the tumble forward feature. Well, that's it for this week's test drive. Believe it or not, you can get the 3-door version of the Aspire complete with dual airbags and ABS for under $12,000. Now, with a cost that low, I think you're going to find a lot of imitators in the subcompact market. And oh yes, to answer the question I posed off the top, Ford's time and effort was very well invested in my view.
The subject of this week's long-term update is the cost of operation. While the Subaru Impreza has performed flawlessly thus far into the test, an area of concern has become apparent. The cost of routine maintenance is extremely high. If you go by the book, the cost of maintaining this car for the first 24,000 kilometers of operation is a staggering $567.40 plus tax. This figure does include both parts and labor, but it's still high by any standards. On a brighter note, we've been averaging a commendable 10 litres per 100 kilometers or 28 miles per gallon. Based upon these figures, the cost per kilometer boils down to 7.7 cents for the first 24,000 K of operation. This is appreciably higher than expected. It will be interesting to see how this car stacks up against the Jetta and the Volvo 850 Turbo wagon. Under the hood of this 95 Maxima is the engine for future generations of Nissan automobiles. But you'll have to wait until next week to have a look at the engine and also find out why Nissan considers it so special. It's now time, though, to leave Arizona, head to the garage and join Bill Gardner.
We're here at the closing of a recent automotive trade show held in Toronto. And I want to talk about one of my pet peeves. Now, there's two things that are really important to me in a vehicle. One is a good driver's seat, and the other is a good set of headlamps. Now, if your car had seal beam headlamps, as most older cars did, and some vehicles still today have them, you always had an option to replace with better lighting. You could actually take those seal beams out, put a quartz halogen or quartz iodine headlamp kit in. You had much better lighting, and you wouldn't offend other drivers because they were easily aimable. But if you have one of today's vehicles, and could be a car or a light truck that has aerodynamic headlights that flow back into the bodywork of the car, I find that the illumination that they provide at night is not very good. In many cases, the lenses are plastic and they deteriorate quickly. So until just recently, you didn't have much of an option with those vehicles, but today we're at a manufacturer's booth that has an optional auxiliary low beam headlamp kit that will supplement your regular low beam headlamps. It's quite effective when it's used properly. It's not offensive to other drivers, and it almost doubles your vision forward and expands your vision to the sides. It's a much brighter, whiter, cleaner light. We're going to have a look at their product.
Well, what we're looking at today is the Hella XL. It's our auxiliary low beam headlamp, and we are the only manufacturer in the market today. It's the only light of its kind in the North American market. The prime advantage is that it gives you 100% light output, and by giving you this 100% light output, it doesn't blind oncoming traffic because it's the way it has been designed with the help of a computer. This light, unlike any other light, comes with a bubble aimer which helps to easily adjust the headlamp so that it is aimed accurately, which prevents the blinding of the oncoming driver.
Now remember that these lamps that you've seen today are intended to supplement your existing low beam headlamps. So when they're used correctly, they won't offend other drivers. But fog lamps can be a whole different story, and I know that's one of Jim Kenzie's pet peeves. He's going to tee off on you folks that use them incorrectly a little bit later. I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 94.
This microchip is one of millions used in the electronic industry. Without it, the modern car wouldn't be what it is today. Here at the Ford Electronics plant, one machine places 20,000 each hour.
Well, the Ford Electronics Manufacturing Corporation originated as the Philco company back in 1928. It moved in 1984 to this location in Markham and renamed itself Ford Electronics Manufacturing Corporation. We build electronics for the automotive industry, have about a little over 1,500 employees now and 300,000 square feet. Last year's revenues were about $277 million. We supply electronics to, of course, Ford in both the United States and Europe, also to Mazda and Nissan, and ship to countries such as Japan, United States, Mexico, Australia, Spain, and England. About 93% of our sales revenue is exported into those countries. We build most of the electronic products that you see on the dash of a Ford these days. That would be an electronic air temp control, an electronic instrument cluster. We also build safety and convenience electronics such as the airbag diagnostic module and the remote keyless entry module that allows you to open your doors with a remote control. Well, typically when a board comes into the plant, it first enters into a placement or insertion area. Then we go on to an odd form component insertion line where robots or people insert odd form components or non-industry standard components into the board. The machine behind me is a nitrogenous soldering machine. The principle the machine works on is one of soldering the boards in a nitrogenous environment. That actually allowed us to rid ourselves of the use of Freon in our manufacturing processes in 1991, which is, of course, an ozone-depleting chemical. The board itself goes through a number of preheat stages. Once it goes over the two waves, the board is completely soldered at that point. We have a functional product. Then we go on to an in-circuit test station where we test for functionality of all the components on the board. At that point, we marry the board itself into some sort of a housing assembly, depending on the product, and we go through a final functional test before we ship it. The normal content of electronics in automobiles today ranges from about $600 to $800. Because of the weight reductions caused by electronics as well as efficiencies in power consumption, we see electronics growing considerably over into the future. It will probably double its current levels in the year 2000.
Among the many cars on display at the recent Canadian International Auto Show were some rare and valuable classics.
This is a 1929 Duesenberg Model J. It has a Wolfington 4-passenger sport Phaeton body on it. The car was, the body is the only one that Wolfington ever built for Duesenberg, so it's one of a kind, and it was completed about April of 1930. The car was purchased by a fellow by the name of John Eberson, who was famous for designing theaters of the 1920s era. They were very spectacular theaters, and he had very definite ideas of art and styling. And so when he commissioned this car, he put his own ideas into the bodywork, and you'll see the sweeping curves of the body and so on. And the color schemes, he didn't want any black to show. He wanted it all to be shades of brown, inside and outside. And so he had the car designed his way. It's a straight 8 engine, about 405 cubic inches displacement. It has a double overhead camshaft and 4 valves per cylinder. It produces 265 horsepower, which was a lot for that period of time. The car would do 116 miles per hour, and they tested them all on the Indianapolis Raceway when they were new. The car changed hands many times. It's had 20 owners. In 1989, it was purchased by Bernard Aaron of Toronto, who brought it to Canada, had the car fully restored to original condition. And a year ago, he came out and visited the Reynolds Alberta Museum in Wetaskiwin, was quite impressed by the museum. Mr. Aaron has it valued in excess of $1 million and has donated the car to the Reynolds Alberta Museum.
These examples of a bygone era offer a surprising level of technology. The dash, as well as being remarkably comprehensive, housed a special lever that modulated the pressure supplied by the brake booster. Another Duesenberg on display was a long wheelbase La Grande dual cowl, one of only 2 ever built. This car was originally owned by the Heinz family. It gained fame in 1983 when it became the first Duesenberg to sell for more than $1 million. As such, it is one of the most important Duesenbergs in the world.
Just the other day I had a problem with a customer's pickup truck. On the way to the shop, I broke down. The nut on the front of the alternator fell off and I had a terrible grinding noise in the front of the engine. I stopped, discerned what the problem was, and then realized I was out of luck because the vehicle had a single belt driving all accessories. I took it off, and of course the noise went away, but within 1.5 miles I'd be overheated. So what would I do? Well, I thought the old pantyhose trick was not relevant anymore with these vehicles with serpentine belts, but I found out within a couple of minutes that it worked pretty well. Here's what I did. What had happened to me was this nut on the front of the alternator had backed off, and the fan blades got loose and started hitting the alternator casting. I couldn't carry on. Now, if you haven't pulled this pantyhose trick before, what you do is cut a complete leg off a pair of pantyhose, wrap it around the crank pulley, and then wrap it up and around the water pump pulley, because you have to turn the water pump and fan blades or you're going to overheat and you'll ruin the engine. Now, after you've got it wrapped around the pulleys, pull it up good and tight and make yourself a knot in the pantyhose, and you're going to trim off the excess so that it doesn't get caught. Make it good and tight so it doesn't slip. There's always going to be a certain amount of slippage, and then trim off the excess with a pair of side cutters or a pair of scissors, and now you can start the engine up, and the water pump will turn at a reduced speed, but enough that you can limp the vehicle in. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
Foglights. Now, longtime viewers will know I've been down this road before, but some of you aren't getting the message. I'm talking primarily to BMW owners here, or Bimmer wannabes in your Bonnevilles, Mustang GTs, Camaros, in fact, any car with fog lamps. These things are invariably bright and invariably misaligned, shining right into my eyes. Look, it's a beautiful sunny day. There's no fog anywhere in this time zone. Half you people with lights are going to be driving home today with those stupid lights on. Now, the woman who owns this car assures me she never uses them. God bless her for that. That they don't make you look cool. They make you look like a jerk. Now, if fog lamps did any good, I wouldn't be so concerned. But I live in an area of the country where there's a lot of fog. I drive more different kinds of cars with more different kind of fog lights than anybody else. I've never seen one case where fog lights did any good whatsoever. It's just you guys, either standard equipment or aftermarket, getting sucked in by the marketing types again. Now, some of you may know I own a BMW 318IS with standard fog lamps. This is my car right here. And see, I've taken the fog lights out, replaced them with steel panels. This is to prevent any temptation for other drivers or subsequent owners. You know, some municipalities have programs whereby you turn in a handgun and they give you a prize. Maybe I should organize something similar with fog lights. Meanwhile, will you shut them off? I'm Jim Kenzie.
Earlier we gave you a sneak preview of the all-new 1995 Maxima. Now, the Maxima has always been a big success story for Nissan. Will that tradition continue? We'll find out next week when Graham Fletcher gets behind the wheel on Test Drive. Make sure you join us. That's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
TSN's Motoring 94 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Quaker State, one tough motor oil. And Midas. For brake, exhaust, suspension, and steering service, trust your car to Midas.